Hello everybody, the jacuzzi arrived, the budget blow up jacuzzi, so I'm flexing in my jacuzzi at the moment. The actual water pump isn't that noisy, but the bubbles themselves are quite noisy. Yeah, knock it off, Graham. Knock it off. So, I'm going to tell you the story about the diamonds, as promised. And I also wanted to ask everybody, how do you cope with bargains, money? Because I know some people are really good with money and some people are really bad with money, and you can be really poor and really good with money and have a really good life, or you can be really rich and absolutely terrible with money, a bit like Meghan and Harry, and everything, you know, it melts away. Personally, I love a bargain. I have 3 rules in my home. It's got to look good, it's got to work, and it's got to be cheap. Everything has to be cheap, because there's 2 ways you can increase your wealth, isn't there? You can either increase your income, which I find utterly hopeless. I've never been able to do that, or reduce your outgoings. So I go for the reducing the outgoings. And that's where I come to the story of my friend. Again, it's not her real name, because this is not my story. This is someone I knew when I was on the run. We were on a campsite, we met this other couple, and they were fabulous. They used to hang out with Eric Clapton and people like that back in the day. So I'll call them Lolly. Lolly's the lady, and what shall I call the dude? Not his real. Don't say his real name, Graham. I'll call him Brian. Lolly and Brian. Well, Lolly and Brian, they were really, really eccentric couple. I mean, he was a typical. They were both like 70s rock star type people. They weren't famous people themselves, and they were always talking about stories. Like, they had a farm in Somerset, and that all went pear-shaped because they grew a weed farm, and it all came on top, and Brian had to go to prison for a bit, and then Lolly sold the farm in Somerset, and then they lived in a really quaint English seaside village, and they lived in an old Henry VIII sort of Tudor manor house, and they were referring to their mansion in, I think it's Hammersmith. Was it Hammersmith on the Thames? Or Hampton Court or something? It was on the Thames. It was a big, big mansion with a garden, and at the bottom of the garden was the Thames River, one of these really pretty places. So I said to Lolly one day, where did you get all your money? And why did you have a weed farm? Because if you sound like you're quite rich people, because you never know if someone's rich or not. Appearances can be very deceptive. And she said, oh, we've never been rich. We've never been rich. I said, how did you afford a mansion on the Thames like that? And she said, oh, we didn't. We squatted. She was really posh, actually. She was like Joanna Lumley. Always, oh, darling, that's absolutely fabulous. Oh, my goodness. It was when Sammy was a baby. And she said, oh, yes, darling, we needed to live somewhere. If one must squat, then a mansion is definitely the best place to do it. And they actually found some of the guy's headed paper at his other address, and they wrote to him to say, we're squatting in your house, hope you don't mind. And he wrote back and said, no, not at all, actually, that's quite lucky, because you're like house sitters. So if you can look after the furniture and keep the place warm and aired, that's fantastic. And they lived there apparently for a couple of years. Anyway, Lolly went crazy one night. She'd had a little bit of a nervous breakdown about something. I don't know if she'd had a few too many vinos, and she stripped naked, ran down the garden and leapt into the Thames, screaming her head off all the way. And the neighbours phoned the guy up and said, I don't think they should be staying in your house. I don't think they're... Anyway, so I said to her, well, how did you get the farm in Somerset? Because, I mean, a farm is not cheap. And she said, oh, well, they were living in a high-rise when her son was a baby. And her husband, Brian, had been out of work for quite a while, as musicians often are. And there was a little place, I don't exactly know where this is, I think it was in the London area. There was the little building, and I've seen these types of places, that was, I think it was on a reservation, on a dual carriageway, in the middle, with like an underpass. And it was a really weird looking building. I've seen this sort of thing, like an old Victorian water house, or you don't know what they are. You drive past them every day and you think, I wonder what's in that. And it had all vines grown over it. And Brian was very interested in it. Anyway, one day it came on the news, and the police said that they had been called to a very elderly gentleman, and when they went in, they thought he was in distress. He'd had a fall or something, and he'd lived in this strange little house. When they went in, the floors were knee-deep in eggshells, which they thought was really weird. Now, what it was, this elderly guy was, I don't know what his condition was, but he wasn't quite, he had some sort of disability. Like, he had the mental age of someone much, much younger. No one had ever taught him to cook, and he had had two sisters, much older sisters, who had been looking after him. And the eldest of the sisters had died in the house about 20 years before. She just laid down on her bed in very, very, very old-fashioned sort of clothes, as Lolly described to me, sort of, well, I don't know, a Georgian, turn of the century. And they just, the other sister and the disabled brother had left her there, and she'd decayed, the body had decayed, and it had ultimately turned into a skeleton, which the police found, and the, I don't know what they were, pathologists or whatever, they examined it and said, yes, this skeleton's been dead for about 25, 30 years. And then the other sister, who'd been his carer, she also died. She went and laid down in the bed next to the skeleton, and she had died, and that had happened some years before, and she had become a skeleton in a dress. Same thing, with like those little boots with a boot hook and stuff. And because the only thing the guy knew how to cook was hard-boiled eggs, so he'd been living off hard-boiled eggs for a very long time. And anyway, this was on the news, and the police had put out an appeal saying they could not find any relatives, they couldn't find anybody at all who could look after this guy. Anyway, the guy went to hospital, and I think he died. So out of pure curiosity, Brian thought, I'm going to go down and have a look. I've always wanted to know what's in that house, and is it really full of eggshells? So he went down, had a look. There was a bit of police tape, but nobody there. And he said it was absolutely full. He had to wade through eggshells on the ground floor. So he went back, told Lolly, and she said, well, let's go down, and I'm curious, let's go down and have a look together. She was like really, really curious about where the sisters had lived and why they wore such old-fashioned clothes, and wanted to know a bit more about the family. And they took their little boy down with them, and she really wanted to go and sit on the bed where one of the skeletons had been and just sort of absorb the atmosphere, because Lolly was into yoga, into meditation, into spirituality and stuff, and it was just such a curious thing that had happened. And she felt a bit of a lump apparently under the mattress, and she thought, oh, I wonder if these are like straw mattresses or something. So she had a little feel under the mattress, and there was a sack, a sack about 8 inches long, and it was full of diamonds, absolutely full of diamonds. And I said to her, what did you do with the diamonds? And she said, well, I bought a farm in Somerset, darling, of course. That's naughty, isn't it? That's naughty. So, me and my bargain hunting, I've got my chinos swimsuit on, this cost €5, I've got my Euros sunglasses, I've got my dollar wedding ring, and I'm sitting in I've got a bargain on this jacuzzi actually. I think that might be why it took so bloody long to arrive. This was cheaper than usual, and it's turned out it's a really, really good quality one. And as I said before, Graham and I are real skip rats. So, what's the best bargain you've ever found? Have you ever found a sack of diamonds? I haven't. God, I bloody wish I could. Mind you, even if I did, I don't know who I'd sell them to.
And what you'd buy with it.
Yeah. I never really got any more out of her on that story. They were a crazy pair. Anyway, yeah. Love to hear your thoughts in the comments. Thank you all for listening and watching.